Good afternoon. My name is Sally Berkery and I'm the Managing Director of CEW UK. The beauty industry has spearheaded the growth of online brand advocacy, and from partnering with the wrong advocates to taking a haphazard approach to gifting, it's easier than ever for beauty brands to get this wrong and in turn, of course, lose revenue. Today, we are delighted to welcome Wearisma CEO Jenny Tsai and Coty's influencer marketing comms lead for luxury colour and fragrances, Grace Fung, who will be taking you through the insights, solutions and winning strategies you'll need to take a methodical and successful approach to brand advocacy. Plus, you will also get access to Wearisma's latest brand advocacy index to learn from the beauty brands building the strongest communities right now. There will be an opportunity to ask questions at the end, so please do pop these in the Q&A panel if you wouldn't mind at the bottom rather than the chat. But without further ado, I'll hand over to you, Jenny.
Thank you so much, Sally. And I just wanted to, first of all, thank CW for this amazing webinar. And CW has always been at the forefront of pushing the boundary of the beauty industry. So it's really, really great to be here today. I also like to thank Grace, who over the years has been always spearheading everything influencer marketing related, the next steps and so on. So I think you're all here for a treat in terms of what Grace has to share. So without further ado, let me introduce the agenda. First of all, we'll be discussing the role of brand advocacy, what it is, and why it's the future of influencer marketing. We'll then look at how that applies in the beauty industry in particular. We will then look at, after that, how to approach brand advocacy systematically. Of course, we'll have a lovely chat with the wonderful Grace on everything relating to how this applies in real life with Coty. I will then unveil, very excitingly, our proprietary brand advocacy index for Q1 2021 for UK beauty. It is an index that demonstrates the intensity of how a brand advocacy community discuss the brands. So think of it as sort of how passionate the brand advocates are in support of the brands. And then, as Sally mentioned, there will be time for questions at the end. Great, so let's jump in. So brand advocacy is the future of influencer marketing. But exactly what is it? Like, what do we mean by it? Well, the one stats that's really worth looking at is this one on the trustworthiness. So about more than 3/4 of people trust social media opinions from friends, families, influencers, other people before they make a product or service purchasing decisions. So when you think about that, 3/4 of people, that's, that can be equivalent to 18 trillion of consumer sales if we apply it straight. And it's very popular in millennials. And what we can see is that content and conversation that's created by the brand advocates in general, so the communities of people talking about brands online, actually create a wider reach. So maybe think back last time of a time when you actually learn about a brand, not through advertising, but actually through recommendations from someone else on social media, right? There's plenty of examples, and even outside of beauty industry, you think of the early days, huge brands have been made, from the likes of Peloton, Tesla, et cetera. So it is surely the next phase of marketing to figure out how a brand can build a community of brand advocates who in turn advocate for your brands and convert their communities to your customers. So that's what we mean by brand advocacy. And influencer marketing, if nothing else, is basically a mean to achieving the goal. And the goal here is to create brand advocacy for your brand. If we go to the next slide, how does that apply in the beauty industry? Next slide, please. So beauty industry has always paved ways for everything innovative, digital. The beauty customers are incredibly savvy and always looking for the latest things online. So what we know is that brand advocacy is especially more important. They're all the new generations of products and services that you've learned within the beauty industries precisely through this method. In fact, what we can see is that a lot of the brands and new products and so on that are visible and actually have a very high brand advocacy score, they actually generate in turn engagement rates that are almost double the industry average. This means that people are actively engaging and looking for recommendations that way. In addition, beauty customers who actually see not campaign paid content necessarily, but those that are recommended by the communities, the organic content, actually have 5% higher chance of converting into a sale. So this just demonstrates the importance of building that, building that communities who can advocate for you. If we go to the next slide. On the flip side, social media is not a one-way street, right? So you're not simply just broadcasting content and so on. It is an engagement with the community. And therefore, where there's any disconnect with the brand ambassadors that are chosen, where there is disconnect between selections of brand ambassadors that may not reflect how diverse your customers are, or to stand for principles that the communities disagree, there would be backlash. So it is certainly important to think about how to select the right advocates, again, going back to the topic today, so that over time, you would basically generate the opportunities that presents itself and avoid the cancel culture that you can see almost 5 times increase between 2019 and 20. Here, I just want to leave you with a thought that audience, which very much suggests the sort of passive kind of on the receiving end, is in fact a liability, whereas community, where people feel that they're a part of supporting you, supporting the products to be as successful as they can, is in fact an asset. So I think that's very much at the heart and the ethos of brand advocacy, is how to interact with people who are your customers, who are your employees, who are influencers, who are any other stakeholders, so that they become part of your communities rather than just a member of an audience. I believe there's a poll. Lucia, would you like to share that with people?
Yeah, so the first poll we'd like you to answer, I'm just going to launch it now. So the majority of respondents from our last webinar stated that they were not yet working with advocates. If anything, what is stopping you from working with advocates? So is that difficulty discovering the true advocates, difficulty in benchmarking the performance of those advocates, connecting or nurturing the relationship with those advocates, or you can put something else? I'm just going to give you a moment to answer and then I'll share the results.
I think it's quite interesting to see that the highest answer everyone's voted is the difficulty of benchmarking the performance of advocates. I can surely understand that, because advocates, if the definition starts to become broader, that involves influencers and so on and so forth, what's the easiest way to understand? And that's in fact one of the topics we'll get into later. So that's really interesting to know. And then number 2 is discovering advocates. Cool. So let's go to a solution-focused approach to brand advocacy. So today we want to share with you a simple 3 steps to approach how to generate this brand advocacy community. So 1 is detection, to partner with the right advocates to come up with a short list of candidates. 2 is to figure out how you segment. So very much when you think about your customers in the same way, your advocates in a similar manner, segment and then understand and monitor the campaign results on the different levels. And 3rd one is to have regular reporting so you can understand what's performing well and what's not, and then rinse and repeat. So it's very simple. Let's go ahead and take a look. The first step, I will let you read through the problem and solutions afterwards. But yes, there is difficulty identifying the brand advocates, as you can see from the poll before. And the way we can do that is within Wearisma or tools that we provide could basically help you identify consumer advocates. So this would look at individuals who has a high affinity to your brands, who not only are fans of your brands, but in fact are started to actively talk about you with frequency, with engagements, that's really worth looking at. So that's the first point, detection. Second part is to look at how to then create a short list that is reflective of the values that you like to convey about your brand, as well as the consumers that you represent. So diversity, sustainability, for example, may be one of the criteria for you to think about. Audience matching, always really important, and always to think about cross-platform benchmarking. So who actually are the right advocates for which platform will allow you to come up with a cross-platform strategy. Here is always much more impactful as we hear how things plays out in real life. I want to highlight and invite Grace to share her experience of picking the right brand advocates, where with this campaign that Grace is about to describe, they actually doubled the performance compared to the average within the fragrance industry. So congratulations, Grace. Could you share more with us?
So this is the launch of Marc Jacobs Perfect. So it's one of our latest fragrance that we launched in September last year. So it actually has become the best-selling female fragrance of the year for 2020, even though we launched it in September. We launched it during the pandemic. The key to this is obviously what we talked about. Obviously, it's a lot of different factors. We have a much bigger campaign on a whole, but we really is the first time really leveraging a new platform, which is TikTok. We also use Instagram, but TikTok really has driven the message of what perfect means. And also the audience itself, we are retargeting the Gen Z audience. So TikTok really was a perfect platform to launch the fragrance and also the messaging. And you can see here we do a challenge, which is all about user-generated content. So it's all about not just the brand, obviously, telling you what the message is about, but it's also an interaction with our core target audience as well. So you see here we have Ricky Thompson, who is a obviously massive TikTok and Instagram talent, who started the challenge with the fragrance spraying, and all you have to do is react to it. So it's a duet content. So you're reacting to what you would be doing when you spray the fragrance. So in terms of the fragrance, it's so hard to actually tell a fragrance story on social media anyway, unlike makeup or hair or skincare. Really telling that fragrance story is much harder. But despite that, with the hashtag #PerfectAsIam, we have generated over 10 billion views. So it's amazing how this global campaign has really rocketed the launch to even the UK as the #1 launch of the year.
Thanks, Grace. Yeah, it's very exciting. And especially, I think you highlighted the sort of interactive element really help create sort of the, I guess this kind of community feel of being part of something. Cool. So going back to next step, and we'll have a chance to discuss further with Grace in a moment. The second step is to track the campaign. So once you select the candidates that you think could be good brand advocate candidates, of course, you don't know if the decisions are right or wrong. So it's helpful to actually start building the measurements in place. So if you move on to the next slide, the kind of things that you should think about in terms of tracking is one, to really obviously think about what the campaign generates. For each of the groups of the advocates, influencers and whatnot, and other stakeholders, but also to think about the organic content that kind of comes from there, whether it is the sort of ripple effect where it's getting picked up by consumers who are interacting with the influencer content, whether it's from other influencers. All those organic content can potentially spread even further. The second part is to look at all forms of content, of course. Automatic story tracking is one area that is very important, of course, these days. Tiered gifting support. I think that's one of the things that we have found brands are increasingly doing. So it's quite similar actually to creating an influencer program in which you would have different sort of levels, if you will. So imagine if you have sort of a bronze, silver, and gold levels where you have all the candidates who could be sort of up and coming influencers. Some are professional influencers, but some are sort of, your nano sort of more consumers and so on. So, you could actually group them. They could start off from the sort of bronze tier. And then potentially there's certain reward that are associated with sort of content creations or just organic kind of interactions. And then, gradually, once you measure and figure out within the group who's actually done well, you can move them to silver tier and then to sort of, the sort of paid collaboration and so on. So that's one way to really think about segmentations and how to build up the program that is reflective, I suppose, of the performances that you can see. Click and sales tracking is one area for us to not forget that, of course, there are important metrics that are linked to awareness and considerations, but conversions could be also something that influencers they themselves could deliver and advocates they themselves can deliver as well. Going to the next part, here's an example where we work with one of our clients, New Look, who effectively start to look at the story tools and analyzing the results. And through there, they're able to optimize their brand ambassador programs and increase the engagement by 23% accordingly. Final step is to continue to monitor, report, and repeat, and do this always. If you go to the next slide, how we provide the support is to, of course, share with you on a monthly basis what happened. So you can compare everything month on month, what's happened on the organic basis, on a paid basis, etc. And then to look at the market level, what is happening amongst competitors, products, because there's always learning and inspirations in terms of the type of influencer, the kind of brand advocacy campaigns, hashtags that people are engaging with. And then finally, to look at all the metrics and really look under the hood. As I mentioned, there's different metrics depending on the strength of your advocate. So it could be awareness related, could be about engagement, mentions, but it could be about conversions as well. So all those metrics potentially can all come into play. And brand advocacy index is one that we found to be really correlated with that strength, for example. So here was an example of one of the global beauty brands we work with. Their goal was actually to increase the number of mentions. So the sheer numbers of people mentioning them through different gifting exercises, and they became number one in their market through this process of optimization. Time for another poll, apparently. Lucia?
Yeah, so we have another poll that we'd like you to answer. So for this one, respondents from our last webinar identified tracking as the most challenging aspect of brand advocacy. Which specific type of tracking do you find the most challenging yourself? So is that organic content tracking, clicks and sales, campaign, story, or something else? Again, we'll just give you a few moments to answer and then we'll share the results.
Cool. Looks like we have a winner. Organic content tracking appears to be quite difficult for participants here, for everyone here. Click and sales tracking and story tracking are a tie of 2 and 3. So it looks like campaign tracking is the one that everyone has under control, which is great. I'd like to invite Grace back for some Q&As. Tell us a little bit more about brand advocacy and the role for Coty brands.
So I can only speak for the luxury division, which is super strict when it comes to choosing the right brand advocacy. Personally, I think authenticity is really important, first and foremost. So this is all about casting the right talent to help your brand tell a really compelling and authentic story, but through their own styles, their aesthetics and their values, as well as passion points. So those that need to be aligned. As an engaging storyteller, I think the talent's ability to really translate and humanize the brand and to align to their own message is also very important. So we really also value building this relationship in-house as well, to really harness the rapport between the content creator, but also sometimes the agents as well. So we believe like the long-term partnership really is the way forward, because it can really build and grow with the brand as well. Obviously, there are a lot of many touch points, and we can look for people manually, but then we also use platforms like such as Wearisma to really get a more solid insights and metrics to really kind of justify why we need to work with these people.
Great. And how have you found over the last year, was there any sort of changes with the pandemic and so on? How has that changed kind of how you identify advocates?
We find like we haven't actually slowed down in terms of doing our paid partnerships. Obviously, there are a couple of months where we have to sit tight and see what's going on. And during those time, what we did was we monitor what's happening around us, whether it's about culture or social changes, just to kind of see where we're at, just kind of testing waters as well. I think from the luxury side, we always required a longer approval process anyway. But since the pandemic, we see some of our brands being more open to more localized strategies and creative, because I think mainly the whole thing about the e-com side of things, people are buying more online, really kind of speed up the process of really putting influencer marketing and content creation at the forefront. Rather than before, it was obviously growing in a really fast rate, but really the past year has speed up so much. And I think even from the more global senses, we have to react much quicker. Also kind of like harnessing the creativity and seeing like influencers content being more authentic. We also see like a lot of our influencers that we work with, their creative have actually improved because they are obviously stuck at home. But at the same time, you get to see more of their real self, which is always a good thing, linking back to that authenticity piece that I just mentioned. Another thing I think it's also what we just talked about is the massive growth of TikTok, because of the growth that exponential growth that we see last year since the pandemic. We actually see a lot of ultra luxe brands getting into that space. So obviously with Marc Jacobs, we've just seen Gucci is tapping into TikTok as well to really engage with the audience. So we're seeing more and more cross-platform campaigns and strategies.
Very, very interesting. Do you find that that you mentioned sort of creating this sort of authentic kind of relationship with in-house and so on? How do you or what advice, I guess, you would give for people to nurture these relationships?
It's got someone from our team just listening in as well. I think it's a long game. It takes a lot of time and effort, and obviously you need to really be passionate about what you do and passionate about your brands, because when you speak to influencers, you're representing your brand. And I think it goes both ways. You need to understand where the influencers are coming from, what they are good at. Obviously, it's just not good to just do a blanket email and just think hope for the best. We do a lot of research when it comes to like before we even start a conversation with an influencer or the agents. We often find building a good relationships with agents really help, because they are the eyes and ears. Even if the people that they don't represent, sometimes they will tell you there are people out there that we need to be mindful of and ones to watch, because I think that really help us, because then we can use Wearisma, for example, to do our due diligence to make sure that the stats that we've been given from the agent or talent are actually accurate, because sometimes they don't give you the right or the type of metrics or insights that you really need. And I think a platform like Wearisma really help us, because you can really see the audience and also the type of values that they have. And I think the most importantly, something like I always use on Wearisma is the average media value, and you really know what you're trying to pay for, especially when you want to negotiate a campaign and a fee, for example.
Great. I think what is really interesting, as you mentioned, is always kind of talking to everyone and figuring out what's coming next and so on. You mentioned a really good point about the creativity is increasing, with pandemic and with new platforms like TikTok. What do you think about how brands should plan for sort of cross-platform activities? Do you think that's going to be more and more frequent, or do you think it's going to be platform specific?
I think it just depends on what brand and what product you're launching, and obviously the objectives of using that platform, because you have, even within Instagram, you can use different functions to promote different content. You probably use Reels more if you want to do a quick how-to. If you want to promote something more live, you use IG Live. And then if you want something a bit more storytelling, a beautiful content like we use for fragrance, we probably use a carousel and pay more for video content. So I think it depends sometimes whether, I would say yes and no, because it also depends on the talent, because sometimes we do find talent that are strong on both platforms, say they're strong on both YouTube or Instagram and TikTok, but it just depends on what your objectives are, whether you want to have a more cost efficient purpose where you want that talent to actually cover everything. But again, sometimes when you look at different platforms, they actually speak to different audience. So within an influencer, even though they are strong on both Instagram and TikTok, they are speaking to different audience. So the content itself will be different. And going back to that creativity, is you see more and more, I think people prefer to call them content creators, because you see more and more people are armed with more skill sets in terms of creating their own content. Gone are the days where people just take a nice pictures with a product. You have to do so much more for a brand to actually be willing to part their budget to kind of say, okay, if you're going out and do this video shoot somewhere remote, obviously we have to fund this to make sure that it's aligned to the brand aesthetic and value. So we're more happy to, give a little bit more budget for that purpose.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a very good point to think about the strengths and potentially create even more specific content for each platform and given the audience and so on.
Yeah.
Great. I think that concludes this section for now, but definitely Grace is available for questions at the end. Great. So I believe the next section is for us to share with you the brand advocacy index. So just to explain what it means, we basically look at during the quarter the level of, let's say, intensity on average these brands have been discussed by their advocates, and the advocates are effectively, as I mentioned, influencers, but it also could be consumers and employees as well. So what the score tells you is how powerful the brand's relative advocacy is, of the community, and also the effectiveness of their brand advocacy campaigns. So without further ado, let's look at the results. So you can see we look at the premium beauty brands in the UK for Q1. Here are some of the results, and how you would read this is sort of the first brand with the BAI, with the highest BAI compared to, say, the 20th brand is about double. So on average, each advocate is sort of positively describing the brands, advocating the brands to their communities, sort of doubly likely between the sort of the comparison index. I hope that's clear. If not, just ask me later. And what is really interesting is you can see that those brands that are much fervently supported by their communities are really engaging from these group much higher engagement rates than, say, compared to sort of the industry average. So it's quite interesting what's happening there. We also took a look on some of the specific brands that create what we call brand advocacy hashtag. So compared to their sort of generic hashtag, we see that when brands kind of create, of course, there's a sort of campaign hashtag, but you have the advocacy hashtag in a way that is always on, but it's slightly more specific, and it talks about certain aspect of the brands. And those hashtags, the content with those hashtags actually generate higher engagement than just the generic one. So it definitely demonstrates that there's a group of people who are sort of actively talking and sharing about the sort of advocacy hashtag content. So that's very interesting as well. Some of the examples from those that rank high within the BAI index, One is Huda Beauty, and their strategy was to really look at creating small scale gifting with KOLs. And many of them actually you can look at is those high engagement rate makeup artists who actually represent the aesthetic. And that has really generated content that are also much higher, so 3 times the industry average. Paula's Choice very much look at this cross-platform activity and really looking at creating something that is specific for each platform. So TikTok actually was one that generated a huge engagement for the audience with the content there. Pixie created different brand advocacy hashtags. So the specific one that allows the community to really collectively become part of the brand's narrative and sharing their experience. So that's also quite interesting as well. I think it's time for our last and final poll.
Yeah, so we have one last poll. So we wanted to ask, if you feel having a brand advocacy strategy is something that you'd like to have in 2021, what would be your main objective? So would it be to build authenticity, create a solid brand narrative, to drive engagement, build brand awareness, increase market share of voice, direct traffic to your site, to increase sales, or something else?
So looks like overwhelmingly the response is to build brand awareness. So that's great. Increased sales is number 2 on that. So it looks like it's a top and bottom funnel activity. Great. So I think this is the last section of questions and answers, and I'll pass it back to Sally. Oh, here, we just wanted to share with you, this is exclusive for CEW members. We would be happy to provide you more insights into the BI ranking for your brand.
So, I mean, I think Grace, actually, one of the questions which I think Grace directly answered, I don't know if you've got anything else to add to it, Jenny, which was about effectively continuing to nurture relationships with advocates. I mean, obviously Grace is well experienced in all of this, but I don't know if there's anything else that you would add to her excellent answer there.
It's hard to add something additional to what Grace just said. I will try.
Yeah, I do.
I think the main part is really once you select the sort of brand advocates that you work with, definitely keep nurturing the relationship with thinking about all the multiple touch points that are possible. So we actually had an example with the clients where actually one of their customers, in fact, were really strong advocates of the brand. So she was actually creating quite a lot of content that actually generated a lot of good engagement just separately on her own. And what they did was they noticed that, and then they effectively kind of invited her and to kind of include her into the sort of influencer program over time with some with previews on new things and involving her on that. And what was super interesting is that she's not sort of your professional influencer per se, but she's someone who sort of represent a lot of the customer group. So it's just super authentic. The way kind of she comes across is not sort of I guess it's sort of it's the kind of aesthetic that people can relate to. And so so actually she's now one of their best influencers in that way. So there was a lot of parts that she's kind of adding to, for example, like the positive body image and so on. So this is in the fashion sector. So I think it's more about not having sort of necessarily the preconception and really looking at who could be quite suited in that way, and then nurture that relationship over time.
Okay, thank you. And sort of back to the heart of it all, one of the questions is, how do you identify the difference between a true brand advocate and an influencer? Quite a hot topic there, I'd say.
Grace, do you want to start?
Potato.
I think you can always find someone who is aligned to the values and aesthetic, because I can only speak obviously again from the luxury brand landscape. So for example, Calvin Klein, we'll always look for someone that are more minimalistic, they're a bit urban, but then those people would not be the type of people that would be aligned to that Gucci aesthetic. But sometimes then we work with an influencer, they would say, actually, I'm a diehard Gucci fan, or I'm a diehard Chloe fan, and then we will just have to find ways to see whether there are any synergies. Perhaps there sometimes people do grow and develop. We worked with influencers before where they were much like a CC type, bit more mature. They're into fluid, and I think that going back to the fact that when you actually in influencer marketing, you are literally leaving it. It never stops. You know, you're constantly looking at people's content, and every time you look at something or someone that inspires you, or we always call it, we go down the rabbit hole, because they will follow some other people that are clearly more creative and inspiring, and then it's more like a loop, and you go and find a lot more engaging and creative influencers as a result. Yeah. But I think also, like, when you talk about identifying advocates and influencers, in the end of the day, also you need to kind of understand, like, why are we working with them? So always with the end in mind, like, what objectives are we setting with working with influencers? Not just because I like the look of the grid, is whether this person's content can actually drive awareness. Are you using this person to drive awareness? Are you using this person to drive engagement? Are you using this person to drive sales? Because driving conversion would be completely different from using someone who's super artistic and creative and do murals that could not drive sales. And you would go for someone who probably would be like, say, a makeup artist who can really talk about a product, then they can actually drive conversion. So I think this is why we need to use a platform like Wearisma to really give you that segmentation, because by just looking at someone's grid doesn't tell you the full story. You need to dive a little bit deeper into what that means.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Grace. And I guess this one's for you, Jenny. This is the killer question. How can you increase your BAI ranking? So,
I think everything that kind of Grace has mentioned, definitely detect and then choose the right advocates that really very much suit the aesthetic of your brand, but also has a good track record of performance. And by that, not necessarily looking at necessarily one number, but look at the organic content that this person has created and how that's actually done for your brand, which may already happened, or similar type of topics. So identify is definitely number one. And two, measure. Again, as I mentioned, some of the people might surprise you that they actually maybe didn't come from a professional background, but actually could rank incredibly high for your brand, and doing that, and then repeat. What we found is that once you identify an objective that you want to do, and in this case for the brand advocacy ranking, it's the number of people that are involved, but also how fervently they are describing your brands. It all has to do with selecting people, measure, and then repeat.
Fantastic, thank you. Well, I think that brings us to the end. I mean, Grace, I'm in awe of the views for the Marc Jacobs launch. I mean, that is incredible. 10 billion. I mean, that's a number that you couldn't even dare to dream of. So, I mean, that's just staggering. So congratulations on that. And thank you all for joining us for what has been our 14th event of the year to date.
Wow.
All of the events at CEW are free of charge as part of your membership. And we were delighted to welcome Jenny and Grace today. So thank you so much. Obviously, we'll be sharing the presentation to you today. And if you have any further questions for the team at Wearisma, please either get in touch with us and pass them on. A little bit of housekeeping, which the team would kill me if I don't mention. On Friday this week, we've got our continued series with Beauty Independent, which is at 3 p.m. So it's quite a nice end to the week. And next week, actually, we're just about to launch. We have got one of our popular Meet the Board sessions, which are essentially a kind of a speed mentoring session with the board. So industry leaders from across brands and Google and all sorts of members of the CEW. And then one final thing, the Beauty Awards. I know we're bombarding you at the moment, but the entries close on Friday, and the tickets for the demo event are selling fast. So be sure to get yours before they all sell out, because we are sending in a mammoth fulfillment task the samples for testing and voting to your individual addresses, whether that's business or home this year. So it's a bit of a logistical thing. So I would just urge you all to get on that as soon as possible. But thank you, Grace. Thank you to Jenny and team. It's been wonderful having you here today, and we'll see you soon.